in. We are here at the Title I Directors Meeting virtually. I hope wherever you are that you are enjoying the Utah second summer. I think it's supposed to be 95 degrees in Salt Lake. If you're down south, I think it's supposed to be even hotter this weekend. My name is Max Lang. I work for the Utah State Board of Education. I work in a section that's called ERSI, and it's essentially federal programs and some related state initiatives. The programs that are in our particular team, Title I, that's why we're here today, Title III, 21st Century Community Learning Centers, Title VI, Indian Education, Homeless, Migrant, and the big one that's expiring on Monday, all of those ESSER funds, the COVID relief funds, CARES Act funding. So I hope everybody had fun with that. If I can just have our folks here from USBE turn your camera on and just give a wave so you can put a face to the name. Here is our team at USBE. You can tell because it looks like we're all in exactly the same room. Thanks all. Okay, let's get started here. Just want to take a look at the agenda quickly and just kind of get a sense of what we're going to be talking about today. So we're lucky to have, as I just go through the agenda here quickly, we're lucky to have Sarah Widke with us. She's got a really busy schedule, so we organized so we could have her available for us. As you know, there are certain times during the years where school improvement becomes a really forefront topic. We are entering into one of those years, so we're really pleased to have Sarah with us to kind of walk through that barrage of acronyms and timelines to familiarize all of us with those particular things. We're also lucky to have Susie Estrada with us, who is our family and community engagement specialist. One of the topics that comes up often for discussion when Val and I and Marilee and Clint are out visiting with schools or virtually visiting with schools is that difference between parent involvement and family and community engagement. We're fortunate to have Susie here to talk about some of those things and provide some additional resources for us. Dr. Estrada is going to talk about a new opportunity that is available for LEAs in interpreter training and new courses. We have our colleague from LRP, Ryan, who will come in and give us a little bit of updated information on the ESEAnow.com resource. And just an FYI, we are in the process of renewing that contract so that that resource will continue to be available. Then as you see on our agenda, I've got a list of updates here that I'll talk through, and then we'll end off the day turning the time over to Val to talk about the new comparability form that she has tirelessly been working through as a resource for you. When we end the meeting, those of us at USBE that can hang on, will hang on to address and answer any specific LEA questions that you have that are relevant to you that you didn't want to bring up in the general meeting. And then Val at the same time will be offering office hours for assistance and technical assistance for the DMI. So on that note, if you'll bear with me, welcome to the Title I Directors Meeting. You'll notice in the agenda, just as some house cleaning items, I didn't schedule a comfort break in there. There's just a lot of stuff on the agenda and new things on the agenda. The meeting is being recorded, right, Becky? Wink, wink. That was your cue. And feel free to take a break when you need to. And the meeting is recorded, and this recording and the related materials will be available for you afterwards. Okay. We'll wait for my computer to catch up. Just as a context, want you to know that we understand that Title I is not the only job that you have. We know that you wear many hats, you supervise many programs, and a lot of responsibility. Today, we hope that you can just be with us here for Title I, this specifically, to put all of those other things aside, and hopefully we can provide some updates for you and some additional information and clarification. Just as context, as you know, in 1965, Congress approved and put into law the Elementary Secondary Education Act. Over the years, Congress has updated and approved and enacted additional versions of that particular law. The current one that we have been functioning under since 2015 is the Every Student Succeeds Act. Congress also sets aside a portion of money to enact or to implement the pieces of these programs, and these are where our federal funds come from. Title I, Part A is a piece of that public law. Its particular title is Improving the Academic Achievement of the Disadvantaged. So Congress also says, okay, so that's what we're going to do. What is the indicator that we're going to use to determine who are the disadvantaged students? Where are those disadvantaged areas? How are we going to address a particular barrier? Well, as we know, that definition is for areas, schools, and students who experience economic disadvantage. So the purpose of Title I is to provide all children the opportunity. The indicator for Title I is students experience economic disadvantage. They provide a resource to us, additional funding, to help assist and level the playing field for those areas, those schools, those students and families who experience economic disadvantage. This year, Congress approved about $18 billion, roughly. In Utah, we have followed through with the goals, and we follow the goals that are set up for Title I, Part A. Academic growth and proficiency, closing achievement gaps, teacher capacity, engaging families and communities, and providing a well-rounded education for students, leveling that playing field so that particular barrier of economic disadvantage has resources to assist us in overcoming those. Our allocation this year through the statutory formulas was about $80.5 million. The purpose of any program or resource that's provided for us, including Title I, used in a school or an LEA, is to improve the educational experience of the students and increase their academic growth and achievement. Title I is a resource. It's not a program on its own. As such, it's part of a continuous cycle that LEAs and schools go through so that they're continuing to provide for the needs of students so they can grow and achieve. Important in this cycle, knowing what students need, putting together a plan with evidence-based strategies and practices that we know will best address those needs, and then at that point, looking for resources to be able to support those particular strategies that we are implementing in those schools to address the needs. Title I is supplemental. It's not a program on its own. And as our beloved Becky Donaldson used to always remind me, any conversation I had with her, fund your plan. Do not plan for funds. We've experienced over the past number of years wild fluctuations in Title I funding for Utah. And as such, this particular improvement model, this cycle, is important in determining that we have resources, but first we need to know what students need and then put a plan together to address those needs. Okay, I will stop sharing. Thank you for entertaining my soapbox there. I'm going to turn the time over to our director of the Center of Continuous School Improvement, Sarah Wibke. There's a lot going on coming down the pike this fall with school improvement. And I'm happy to turn the time over to Sarah.
Thank you, Max. Good morning, everyone. It's very nice to meet you all in this virtual space. For those who don't know me, my name is Sarah Wibke. I am the Director of School Improvement, new to me. I've been at USBE for over 9 years now, and previous to this role, I was the Early Learning and Literacy Coordinator down in Teaching Learning. So I'm still here in case you thought I left. I'm not. I just moved to a different section and now I get to work with these amazing people on this call. So we are going to talk a little bit today before I share my slides around school improvement, specifically around just a summary of the basics. I know for some of you, this may be your first Title I directors meeting, and for some of you, this might be your 40th, right? So I want to make sure that we are providing everyone with sort of a same level of base knowledge in this space, and then also sharing a resource that if you want to dive a little bit deeper, you are welcome to do that. While I am sharing my screen, it's likely I won't be able to see the chat box, so I am totally fine. You are welcome to unmute, or someone else on the team can say, hey, Sarah, there's a question, and read it so I can answer it, that kind of thing. I also have an amazing colleague with me today that I'm hoping can turn on our camera and do a little wave. Megan Tippett is also going to be joining me in this presentation and some question asking. So Megan, if you want to turn off your camera and give a little wave, that would be great. And Megan, do you want to come off mute and introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Megan Tippett. I actually am on the data and statistics team, but I do other data for school improvement and accountability at the moment. So a lot of the stuff you're hearing, calculations, the data comes to what I put together for our reporting, which will be on our website soon. So that's exciting.
Thank you, Megan. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share. All right, can everyone see my screen?
We can see it.
Excellent, thank you so much. Hold on, it's not on the 1 minute. It's not on the right slide for some reason. Let's try this one more time. There we go. All right. So when looking at the school improvement designations, it seems like there are only 5, but if we're being honest, there are more than that. So let's just do a rundown of what that looks like.
Sarah, are you sharing your screen? Because we can't see anything anymore.
Oh,
Sorry.
it's not. Let's try it again. Thanks for letting me know. I appreciate it very much. Now?
Yes, that looks great.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Okay. So we have a set of federal designations. That's where the majority of our school improvement designations come into play. And then we also have our state designations. One designation in the federal space is new this year. So a lot of times you'll hear us throw around acronyms and it can be a little bit much. And at least in the federal space, they all end with an SI. And some people link that to school improvement, but it actually means support and improvement. So you'll notice that it's really just the first word that shifts in all of these titles. So TSI stands for targeted support and improvement. ATSI is additional targeted support and improvement. And then CSI is comprehensive support and improvement. However, there are 3 pathways into CSI. These 3 pathways include CSI low performance, CSI low graduation rate, and then the new one that is just now being designated is CSI low performing student groups. So that is new this fall. We will have formal designation emails coming out next month. Then we also have our state designation space, which Springboard, which you may or may not have heard of, won't actually start until 2025. So we don't have to worry about that just yet. And then Elevate, which for this newest cohort, schools have already been contacted and are aware of who is in that space. So let's talk about what all of these mean. So each of these, like I said, they're either a federal or a state designation. They may be for a Title I school only or non-Title I schools, or for both Title and non-Title. It may be a whole school designation or a student group designation. We also talk about the frequency, the most recent year of designation, and the first year of possible exit from that designation. And then is it LEA level support or state level support? So for TSI, again, which is Targeted Support and Improvement, it is a federal designation. It is for both Title and non-Title I schools. It is a student group designation, not a whole school designation. It does get designated annually, so we have a new TSI list every year. The most recent year of designation is 2023, only because ours aren't quite finalized yet, but will be in a hot second. So this will say 2024 soon. And then, of course, the first possible year of exit for 2023 designation was this year. And then if for those that are going to be newly designated this year, it will be 2025 for their possible first exit year. And this is LEA level support, which I can talk a little bit more about that in the future here. Then we move to ATSI, which is Additional Target Support and Improvement. Another federal designation. It's for both title and non-title schools. It is a student group designation as well. So we're looking at, with the bottom 5%, which student groups are falling below that space. This one is designated every 3 years. The most recent year was 2022, and they can then exit in 2025. However, it also means in 2025, we will be designating more. And this is also an LEA level support. So then we come to CSI, which I think for most people is probably one that's a little more confusing because we have those 3 pathways in. So with CSI, Comprehensive Support and Improvement, and these are all federal designations, for low performance, that is only a designation for Title I schools. It is a whole school designation. It happens once every 3 years. Most recently in 2022, first possible exit for that group is going to be in 2025, and then we will redesignate. And it is state level support. Actually, all of these are state level support. For low graduation rate, obviously this is only for high schools, but it is both title and non-title. It is a whole school designation, also once every 3 years. So the same entry and exit at this point. The new one, this is the new one that is being designated just now. It's the first year. CSI, low performing student groups, only for Title I schools. It is whole school for entry as far as the designation, but then the exit is student group. And the reason for that is because for a school to fall into this specific category, it means that they have been in ATSI, which was the previous slide that I showed you, which is Additional Targeted Support and Improvement, for 4 years. And so now they are lovingly being moved into CSI, low performing student groups. So that's why the exit is around student groups and that focus. So we say the frequency is annually because it could be annually. It's not likely to always be annually because the frequency is aligned to the ATSI exit. So that's why it could be annually, but not necessarily. The most recent entry, of course, is right now. And so the first possible exit for that group of people will be in 2027. And again, all of these are state level support. So then when we go to state, and this is Springboard again coming 2025, a state level designation, it is for non-Title I schools only. It is a whole school designation. It's once every 4 years that we designate starting in 2025. And the first possible year of exit is 2028 because they can potentially exit their 3rd year. They don't have to wait till year 4. And then this one is also state level support. This last one that I want to talk about, Elevate, and you'll notice I had opt-in here, is Elevate isn't something that we necessarily designate like the other ones that we've discussed today. It is an opt-in situation that you are opting into being in this designation when you apply. And we don't have enough space for everyone that applies, but we pick up 6 to 7 schools each cohort. So this is a state designation. It is for non-Title I schools. It is a whole school designation. We will designate these groups annually, except for years when Springboard schools are designated. So what that means is next year in 2025, when we designate Springboard, we will not start a new Elevate cohort until 2026. So we do skip a year when we have Springboard designations. The most recent year of designation was right now. We just designated some recently, and then their first year possible exit is in 4 years. And again, this is state level support, but is an opt-in situation, not something that you are necessarily designated as until you decide you want to be.
Hey, Sarah.
Yes.
Hi, this is Jody. It's good to see you here.
Hey, Jody, nice to see you.
So when you talk about Title I and non-Title I, where does targeted assist Title I come in?
Ooh, that's a great question. I don't even know if I know the answer to that. Megan or Max, do you know the answer to that?
Can you clarify? Because targeted assistance is for both Title and non-Title I schools. So there's not a either or in that situation. Does
Okay,
that
so
answer your
my
question?
my school is targeted assist, meaning we don't have the 40 families to designate them as a full title.
Oh, that's what you're talking about.
Yes.
Targeted assistance, if I can butt in,
Yeah, go ahead, Val.
is a Title I school. And the federal government did us no service by naming TSI and targeted assistance almost exactly the same. So that's
Great.
really confusing. So if you're school-wide or targeted assistance, you are a Title I school.
Thank you, Val. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Val. All right, so another question that we oftentimes receive is around, well, how did we get in? What's the entry? How did we get in this situation? So there are indicators that we look at, and this is a brief overview. I am not the accountability specialist. I will never claim to be, nor do I want to be, but in the accountability space, these are the indicators that we look at for elementary schools, middle schools, and junior high schools. And so with that being said, you can see there are 4 specific indicators that go into the calculation for your school's accountability score. You can see each of those indicators, what percentage of the total points are included, and then what the total points possible are. And don't worry, I'll show you where you can find this. It's not hidden, it's not a secret. And then indicators for high schools are a little bit different. Obviously, there are a lot more indicators, as you can see here, but we're also still showing the breakdown of the percentage of total points for each indicator and the total points possible for your accountability scores. So when we talk about entry and the scores and the data and all of those pieces, these are the indicators that are going into it based on what kind of school you are in. The next question that we get is, well, what assessments or what information is linked to that said indicator? So you'll notice on the screen, I'm certainly not going to read this to you because I know you are all excellent readers. But in this space, you can see which specific grades and specific assessments or cohorts or courses are linked to each of those accountability indicators. So I'm just going to give you a minute to look through those. So the best resource for y'all to be looking at for all of this information and more is our updated Utah's 24-25 Accountability Technical Manual, recently updated, and the chapter 2 is really the accountability system. So if you want to deep dive into those indicators and the data and how it's calculated and the business rules and all of those types of things, you're going to want to look at chapter 2. And if you have questions about chapter 2, I'm not your girl. To be clear, Megan, I know, can answer some questions in that space. And then anyone on Darren Nielsen's team in the accountability space can certainly support you as well. Chapter 4 is our space, that school improvement space around what is the designation, what's the entry and exit criteria. And we also then worked with Megan and the accountability team to add in calculations, because that was a request from the assessment directors when we brought a draft to them and they gave us feedback to make it even better. And it's a lot better after they gave us that feedback. So we're really grateful for that. So we're going to jump into that specific document. And I'm going to make it a lot bigger. Is that big enough for everyone to see on the screen? I'm getting some nonverbal feedback. I appreciate you all so much.
Looks good to me, Sarah.
Great. So in looking at the contents of this, like I said, there are several chapters. The one that we look at the most often is chapter 4, because that's the one that I'm speaking to at this time. And with that, we're going to start on page 32. So I'm going to take a quick jump there. So at the beginning, we have a little bit of background here. And again, while this is not the accountability chapter, it does give you the accountability rundown, or at least a summary. Could I ask someone on the team, maybe Megan, could you put the link to the accountability tech manual in the chat box for everyone in case they want to follow along on their own? Thank you so much. So those indicators that I was talking about, you can see those here, and then the high school ones on the next page. And then the assessments that we were just talking about, or what specific coursework is linked to those indicators, is all right here as well. So now you have a space that you can go and look for that if you want to have a quick comeback to it. We also knew this year, because like I said, we threw it out and started over. So it probably looks very different than it has in the past. But you'll notice we now have equations and examples. So if that's something that you really want to figure out what your overall percent is and what that looks like as far as how we are calculating it, you can see from the calculations and also, or the formulas and also the examples that we put in here. And we have 3-year average scores and single-year examples as well. Then we move to high school, and then we also have a 3-year and a single-year score. We also put a very interesting single-year score in here that has no ACT points, because sometimes you'll notice that there are certain schools that maybe don't have points in all of the indicators. So that's why we have these little asterisks here in case there are situations where that occurs and what we do in that space, because I know we've been asked that before as well. And then again, more examples and what that looks like. As far as the Title I cut score, with ESSA, it requires that every Title I school or student group in a non-Title I or Title I school that is performing in the bottom 5% of all of our Title I schools shall be identified for school improvement. So this is our coming from federal designation requirements. And to determine that cut score of the bottom 5%, we give little blurbs about what it means for CSI. And then of course the calculations also for TSI. And then we actually give an example. While I recognize that this example doesn't show every school in the state, because nobody wants to see an example like that in a manual, we did give 20 schools here. And then as you can see, we have the bottom 5%. So when we're talking about where's the bottom 5%, we rank all of those schools. Once we get to the bottom 5%, this is where the cut score is. So that's right where it starts. So it does change every year. And then we also have the targeted support and improvement section here for cut scores. Megan, is there anything you want to add to that? Okay, thanks. Then we go to school improvement designations. With those school improvement designations, one thing I want to add is sometimes we are asked, well, what are these student groups that we refer to often? So here are those student groups that we refer to often. So it could be economically disadvantaged, students with disabilities, our English learners or multilingual learners, African American or Black, Asian, Hispanic or Latin, American Indian or Alaska Native, multi-race or Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, and white. So those are the different student groups that when we talk about if those student groups fall below the 5%, that's what we're looking at. And then the things that we went through on the first few slides, we have it all in one table. So if you want to look at compare the differences and similarities between the designations, you are certainly welcome to do that. And hopefully this gives you some information in that space.
Sarah, I have a question in the chat.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Pete's asking, is the cut score from the overall rise or per test?
Ooh, super good question. Megan, I'm going to hand that off to you.
Yeah, so the cut score is based off of the overall total percent for each school. So you'll notice on the accountability resources page under the assessment, section on our website, we have rank lists, and that's kind of a good way to see how this happens by looking at those. If this is based off of full school accountability scores, which is the outcome of all of those indicators added together, divided by each school's total percent possible. So it's not based off of RISE or per test or the subject areas. It's the combination of all of those accountability indicators to create that overall total percent for each school. Does that clear that up? Hopefully.
We got a big yes.
Great. And I did go to the assessment page where she was talking about the rank lists, and we have them here. So it's just schools.utah.gov/assessment/resources. All right, going back. Like I said, we continued these specific tables through each so that you don't have to always go back and look. And so under each, we have, like you can see for TSI, we have all of the entry criteria and what process we follow to identify that. So it is marked down step by step what we're doing in this space. And then if there's any specific note or something for you to be aware of, we included that below as well. Not each of them have that. When it's talking about accountability points, again, we refer you back to chapter 2 for those additional details, just because that is the accountability chapter within this manual. And then we also included below that the exit criteria so that you know exactly what process we follow to exit TSI student groups in this space, and then the exit equation. And then we do the same thing. We follow the same template basically for all of the designations. So ATSI or additional target support and improvement is next. We again include the table and then all of the entry criteria with a note. And then the exit criteria as well. And then we have exit equations and examples in this space for ATSI. That were a nice bonus that Megan created, and thank you very much to Megan for doing that, so that you can see what that looks like and what those examples could look like if this is something that you really want to dig into with your data. For CSI, we again followed the same format and included the entry criteria and exit for each of the 3 spaces, as well as exit equations and examples. So I'm just going to go through these. I want to pause here because this is the newest one. So this is the one that people are probably least likely to have awareness of. So for CSI entry criteria for CSI low performing student groups, we will follow the following process. So it's any Title I school with a consistently low performance student group that doesn't exit ATSI within those 4 years. So I know we talked about that again. I just want to mention it again. When a Title I school has student groups that have been designated as ATSI and they fail to exit after 4 years, their baseline and timeline are reset to the year of CSI identification. So what that means is, forget how you were identified as ATSI, it's a reset. We're starting over, but we are still being aware of which student groups you're coming into this space with. For exit criteria, you have to follow both A and B to exit. So A is reduce the gap in performance for all of the designated student groups by 1/3 between the student group's baseline performance from the year that you were identified as CSI, not ATSI, as CSI. And so it's 55% of all points if a school is elementary, middle, or junior high, or 57 if the school is a high school. And here's the B, the school's performance must exceed the exit score for the lowest performing 5% of Title I schools from the year that the school is identified as CSI. So this group is eligible for exit after year 3 or 4, either one. So as early as year 3. So if you met the criteria by year 2, you're still not eligible for exit, not yet. And if all designated low performing student groups are not eligible for exit, then you move into more rigorous intervention with those specific student groups. And then again, we have the exit equations and some examples. And then we move into the state school improvement section. And so we start with Springboard because that's the only state designation that is a non-opt-in situation. This is the one that hasn't started yet. So we will designate every 4 years, beginning in 24 or in 25-26 school year, so next fall. And it is the 5 lowest performing elementary, middle, or junior high non-Title I schools, and the 2 lowest performing non-Title I high schools when ranked, of course, using our accountability system and averaged over 3 years, which means for Springboard, we will designate 7 schools total. And then again, we included the table. We also included the entry criteria for that, which we would hit on it more next year when that's a new designation. And then Springboard exit criteria, which you've probably noticed looks very similar to CSI exit. And that is, it was meant to very similarly mimic that situation, just for non-Title I schools. And then we have exit evaluation or exit equations and examples. And then we also have an extension. This is only for Springboard. If they fail to exit in the 4th year, they might qualify for an extension for up to 2 years. And here's the potential way you could be granted that extension. So just for your awareness, that's what that looks like. And then we have the extension equations and the examples for that as well. Then we move into Elevate, which, as I mentioned, it has already been designated. This is the opt-in state designation, and we have the entry criteria for that below, as well as the exit. Then we do have some special cases if you want to read a little bit about that, if they don't have an overall score or a determination can't be made, or if it's their 1st year of operation. Split schools, if they're serving specific grades, we do have to split the school. Schools that are serving special populations are also included in this section. So I'm going to go back to the slides then. The designation timeline, like I mentioned, for federal designations, the state will notify LEAs, and then the process is that LEAs need to notify their schools. We will not be notifying schools at this time. Obviously, Elevate is a little bit different because it's an opt-in situation. They know that they applied in all of those situations. But for federal designations, we will notify the LEA, and then the LEA needs to notify their schools. And so that may seem different this year. We're doing our very best to make sure that we are notifying districts and LEAs first, because that's how it should be. And then having you then notify your schools so that you are taking the lead and you are aware of all of our communication, all of the support that's going to be provided, funding, and all of those types of pieces. And then any other questions? I'll stop sharing. Looks like some questions were answered in the chat box, so I think we're good to go there. Any additional questions before I pass it off to the next presenter?
Just a quick one. So the state will notify the LEAs that fall under those categories.
Yes, correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, well, thank you all so much. I will, if you are wanting to be on our listserv, we are currently creating a listserv for those that are deemed as the contact in your LEA for school improvement in general. If I would love it if you would send me an email so I can add you to our listserv that we're starting. I'm going to put my email in the chat box now so that if that's something that you would like to be included on, or you know others at your LEA that maybe aren't here but should be included for school improvement information, please just send me an email so I can get you added. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Megan. Just to put your mind at ease, should you receive that phone call or that notification that you are a school or have a school in your area that has been designated for one of those school improvement initiatives, we have a team at USBE that is dedicated to providing that support to you. So please reach out and we can get that assistance for you. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Megan. Thanks for making your schedules work for us. At this time, I'm going to turn the time over to Susie Estrada, who is our Family and Community Engagement Specialist. As I said, oftentimes when Val and Marilee and Clint and I are visiting with LEAs and schools, one of the topics that we tend to have conversations about is the difference or parent involvement versus parent engagement. As most of you are aware, ESSA kind of updated that definition. There was a shift from parent involvement to that terminology, parent engagement. And it is kind of a shift in mindset. Susie, do you want to take over the screen or do you want me to run your slides for you?
I can take over, and now I'm no longer invisible. Sarah actually helped me figure out what was going on. I do have a bit of a cold, so I'm sorry about my voice. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. And then can you all see my slides?
Yes.
Perfect. So like Max said, I'm the Family and Community Engagement Specialist. My role, I'm currently housed under the Special Education Department with the Program Support Team. But I'm really kind of everywhere. I work with Title I schools. I work with special education departments. Anyone that needs support, I'm available. We offer trainings and professional learning, technical assistance. To anyone that asks, I'm here. So you can email me, you can submit a TRP. Those are all options for you. If you just want to brainstorm or get more specific, just let me know. So Title I and family engagement, again, Title I schools are required to engage students' families via outreach efforts. This can include your annual meetings, but with these Title I funds, you can get more creative. And so when we're talking about how to make purposeful workshops or parent events, you can look at your Title I funds and say, well, how can we use this funding not only to host let's say a Christmas night or a Christmas festival, but make this a purposeful event? So getting insight from families on how, one, they will be able to participate. Do they need childcare? Do they need meals? What is it, transportation? And then getting a little creative in how you can help families in that sense. There is not a huge difference, according to research, in how parents from Title I and non-Title I schools participate and how they would like to receive their information. There is often an assumption that Title I school families engage differently or have different hopes and dreams and desires. That's actually not backed by research. What we're seeing, and this shows up in our special education parent involvement survey, is across the board, parents just want more frequent and ongoing communication. So before we jump into some of our definitions, I want you to start thinking about, what does family engagement look like? What does it sound like? And what does it feel like? So for some folks, it might look like a family night where parents are showing up in troves. You have a full house. Everyone's laughing. It might sound like that laughter and conversation. It might feel like joy and fulfillment. But then I want you to get a little deeper and think about, what is the goal behind this event? So the parents are involved, they're showing up. They might even have interactions with teachers and administrators, but are we then engaging the families? So when we're talking about engagement, we're really looking at that deeper conversation. We're looking at building that relationship. We're looking at getting beyond the superficial, beyond that attendance sheet of saying we had 50% of parent attendance. We had, 90 parents that showed up. Those are great numbers, but really what we're looking at is that deeper connection. So in this sense is, what does it look like? Does it look like the workshops are created with parental input? Did parents say that they want a workshop around how to address social media concerns with their teen? Or is it something that the school decided? Does it sound like language interpretation, or that the event is hosted in the primary language? So if your school site, if the primary language there is Spanish, is the event hosted in Spanish, or is it in English? And you have a lot of families that are going to need interpreters, right? And then does it feel like connection? Are families showing up and are they meeting with each other? Are you creating parent networks? Or is it just, you know, a happy and a good, and that is a great thing to do. I love the stations where we get to create souvenirs that we take home. But again, we want that deeper, we want it to be purposeful, and everything that we do really should be aligned to the long-term academic goals and the life goals and those building protective factors. So, what barriers are there to family engagement? I would love it if you all could put in the chat or come off mute. What barriers you all are facing when it comes to family engagement, either with your district, with your school. This could also be with community partners, with your families, or even with students, because students are a part of the family, and we sometimes forget about that when we're talking about family engagement. Students don't get left out of the picture; they're a part of the family too. So they should have a voice in the way that we're talking about family engagement. So if somebody wants to look at the chat, because I lost my Zoom, or if you want to come off mute, that is great too. I don't know where my chat is. So if someone wants to read anything that's on there.
Susie, one thing I hear all the time is parents don't have time. I hear that almost their availability. Karen is backing me up on that. They're available, especially for those that work.
Yeah, so that's a frequent thing. So working with, I'll give them an example of like Girls on the Run is a popular program. And it is volunteer based. Oftentimes it requires that parents show up as volunteers, especially for their 5Ks. Parents are usually the running buddy. But it is a huge challenge. So the charter school that I was at, we didn't often get parents that were able to come and volunteer because they were working multiple jobs. So one of the things that we'll talk about is that mindset shift when we're talking about the willingness. And we're going to shift that into just priority. So if I do volunteer, if I do go to this event, what additional thing am I taking on? And so when I say taking on, that means, does that mean I'm going to have to pull an extra shift later? Does that mean I'm going to have to make dinner later? And so the mindset shift also requires that the LEA asks, well, how can I remove something from the family's plate so that way we can increase their availability and their access to this event? With that, also with information that's being provided, if it's important information that we need all families to have, the information should not live and die at that event. If parents can't come, or what are the other ways that we're going to make sure that they get this critical information so that they can use it and support at-home learning, and again, building those protective factors for themselves and for their kids. Additionally, when we're talking about availability, that's where parental input comes in again. So are we asking families when they're available? Are we scheduling around family input? So for example, are we scheduling things in the evening under the assumption that our families will be able to come in the evening? And then we find that families are still not showing up. If we ask families, would they say, we're more likely to come, even if it's just for 30 minutes during our lunch break? That is something that has happened. Families won't be able to come in the evening, but around 12 o'clock, they might be able to come, maybe not for the full hour, but for 20-30 minutes, they'll show up because that's when they're available. Bridget put in the chat, creating a focus or topic that intrigues the families enough to get them to participate. Exactly. So again, that comes through parental input. It's about asking families, what do you need? What matters most to you? And really, you can think about it like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So if we're asking families to be able to move up higher and to go into that space where they can start to like learn and then dream big and get to the next step, we first have to help them feel safe and secure so that they can then move past surviving and really into a space of thriving, where they can tap into what is my potential? What do I want beyond just being able to make it through the day? A lot of us are just making it through the day. So what's the difference? When we're talking about parent involvement, we have parents that are probably involved, but we can't always see it. So they might be reading the newsletter, they might be checking homework, They might even go to your parent-teacher conferences, and sometimes we think that that is parent engagement. And then we even think that participating in school fundraisers might be engagement, but it's actually more parent involvement. So parent engagement is looking at how are we getting family voice into the school? How are we utilizing their input? And how is it being used as we're setting goals throughout the year, as we're checking progress throughout the year, or how are we sharing that information with families? And again, how are we looking at access? There is a lot of room for play when we're talking about family engagement, and it's about creativity. It's about going beyond the survey. Surveys are great. We use them a lot. But it's also about just going out into the community and having conversations, and just having those informal check-ins. Again, it's about engaging in deep conversation for understanding collaboration. So we can make a lot of assumptions about folks. I make a lot of assumptions, let's say, about my husband sometimes, and I'm not always right. So sometimes it's about maybe taking a minute and then having a conversation where we can get deeper and really get to understand a different perspective. Shared goals and responsibility. So parent engagement, it's about the two-way communication. It's about mutual responsibility, and it's about onboarding families. So the same way that we onboard staff, we need to onboard our families too. And it starts with the moment that they come in and register. Your front office staff are the selling point for your school. They're also like the nucleus. They know everything. They send out the messages to everyone. At the charter school that I was at, when we needed to know something about a family, a student's been absent for a week, or we've noticed a change of behavior, the front office staff are who we would ask first. And they're the ones that knew, oh, you know, a parent has, you know, been deported or has been incarcerated. And so we're starting to see this behavior, or there's been some other change in the family. So your front office staff really are the ones that get to interact with families the most. Sorry about my runny nose, everyone. So again, what's the difference? The disengaged parent, it could be educational neglect. That definitely happens. There are some parents that don't care, and this is just the nature of, you know, humans. We're mandated reporters for a reason. Neglect and abuse, they're real things. But majority of the times, parents are really trying and they're giving it their all. 100% of parents are doing the best that they can, even if that means that it's not what is ideal. It might be the best that they can do. There is a video that I watched about a representative who adopted their children. And they were talking about how one of their children came from a home where their parents were addicted to substance. And the way that they framed it was, I know that those parents love their kids. I just know that they loved being high more. And that can happen for a number of reasons, but just that frame of empathy and of understanding that they do love their parents. They just weren't able to be the parents that those children needed. And so for the role of the LEA, it's not to fix, it's not to judge, it's to understand that while educational neglect or neglect in general can happen, majority of our parents are showing up and they do care. I always share about one mom that for a whole year did not like me, would run at me, yell at me. It took a year of consistently showing up for her, consistently greeting her, eventually doing a home visit, and then building that relationship with her and building that trust with her. So that now, years later, their child was able to come back and advocate for their younger sibling and say, our mom's health is declining. They're having some cognitive decline. And so this is probably impacting my younger sibling. So it's really a ripple effect once you're able to establish that relationship with the family. But again, it takes time. Lack of buy-in to the preschool through 12 system. So for some families, there might be a lack of understanding on how the preschool through 12 system works, and the benefit that can come of having a fully engaged experience in that system. So the way that us as the schools or as a school district, it's again about onboarding families so that they know how to navigate the system, so that they have the skills to be able to do so, and so that they understand the long-term benefits of what that's going to have. So building on the 5 protective factors when it comes to resiliency, just overall development, and letting them know it's not about achieving a specific goal. It's not about us wanting them to go, them being the student going into higher education. It's about achieving the hopes and dreams that that student has, the family has, while working in a collaborative manner. And then questioning of the pre-K through 12 system itself. So initiatives, strategies, or requests. We see a lot of this in the media right now. You all are doing great work, but from the outside looking in, people have a lot of questions. So people have a lot of misunderstandings, and everyone wants to keep their child safe. So when there's misunderstanding, there might be fear. And again, until we build that relationship and build that trust, we can't have a fully engaged parent. The disengaged parent is the one we're putting responsibility on that family member and on the parent themselves. The unengaged parent, however, is the parent who does want to participate. They do want to be present, but they're just not sure how. So they're curious. They want to support learning at home. They might buy books for their students. They're just not 100% sure how to support literacy. They're invested, they're buying the school supplies, they're going to parent-teacher conference events, even if they don't speak English, and that's the only English that, or the only language that's offered. They're in need of supports, they're in need of tools, and then they're in need of information on how, why, and of their parental rights. So especially if their student is struggling with a disability or a behavior, and they don't know how to advocate for that student, it might look like they're unengaged, but they might just be really overwhelmed. They might just not know, especially when we're calling home. And I've been the administrator that has to call home sometimes every day to say, hey, like, we have eyes on them, but they refuse to go to class. And that's a difficult conversation. And for a parent that's already struggling with transition and something else that's going on in their life, it's a very full plate. So the question here is, are we setting the stage for parent engagement? Are we explicitly and clearly communicating roles and expectations? Do families know what we are expecting of them? Do they know what their job is when it comes to supporting English literacy or math literacy? Do they know the tools that they have easily available to them, like on their phone, and how to access those things? Is communication accessible for them? So again, are we explaining things at a general level? Sometimes when we're in these meetings or we're talking to each other every day, it becomes a third language, and we forget that other people don't understand. So for the example that I always use here is my husband's a mechanic, and he'll come home and he'll tell me things about his job that make perfect sense to him and to his co-workers, and to me, I'm like, that is great. I thank you for sharing that with me, and I'll walk away. I don't know anything that he just said to me. But in his mind, he has explained it to me perfectly with all of the tools that he knows, all of the names, but I got nothing. A lot of our families feel the same way, where it's great. Thank you for all the information. I don't know what any of it means. So making sure that we're explaining things at a general level that the typical parent would be able to understand. Oftentimes this means at a 3rd grade reading level. And for some of our families, it might also mean having to do like audio recordings or visual, especially if we have families that don't know how to read in their first language. That is a reality that a lot of our families are facing. Again, asking families what they want and need sets a stage for engaged parents, because we're getting their input. Everything that we're doing when it comes to family engagement should be coming from not an assumption, not a desire only. It should be coming from a comprehensive approach, which means that families are providing input as well. And then providing supports for participation. So it's not enough to have a workshop that parents have asked for. It's about either offering that workshop on multiple nights or at multiple times. It's about having the recording available for them. It's about having language interpretation if they need it. And different, just thinking about your demographic and thinking about what are they going to need to be successful. And again, that mindset shift. So approaching with curiosity. Often we approach with judgment, especially when we are in a space where we are just tired. Friday Friday at 1 p.m. Is a very judgy time because we are tired. I know I was tired. And so anything that came Friday at 1 p.m. did not get approached with curiosity often. But approaching with curiosity provides us the opportunity to think through different scenarios, think about things from different perspectives, and to be open to changing either our strategies or changing the way that we view or think about things. A mindset shift also requires thinking about things from an asset-based focus, so strength-based. Dr. Yoso has what's called a cultural strengths model, and there's 6 different cultural strengths that they address. Some are resilient, some are linguistic, but just knowing that everyone from every background, all families, all values, all family makeups have their own strengths, and it's about us getting to know them and then viewing these different things from a strength-based lens. And then reflection over reaction. So when we have a difficult conversation or a tough moment, or we get a difficult email, rather than reacting, how can we reflect on this and how can it become a learning and growing experience, not just for the parent and the student, but for us as a school as well. And then alignment and intentional collaboration. So everything that we do, again, needs to be family focused, but it also needs to align with your goals. So whether it's your newsletter or your teachers are doing an activity, it should be informed by family needs, by student data, and by what's going to support everyone, the family and the student, school, in reaching your school goals. So the way that I often think about this is coming from a preschool classroom was, don't do it because it's cute and on Pinterest. Do it because it has a reason and a purpose. What are the standards? What is the goal? How is this aligning with our families? How is this aligning with the long-term goal for the student? And this goes for partnerships too. So oftentimes, especially in Title I schools, you might get offers from different community members to volunteer or to partnership or to host an event. I quickly learned that not every partnership is the right partnership for me and for my school. What I need is an intentional partnership that's going to be meaningful and valuable and going to really impact our students and our families. So that alignment and that intentional collaboration can really help fill the gaps in resources and services, but you don't have to duplicate the wheel. And then a quick recap. So you'll have these slides, but thinking about your core values and family engagement. So what is your why? I'm going to open this and hope that it shows for you all. It did not. I'll open it over here. But I think Max is sharing these slides with you all too, so you can look at these later. But this is a quick activity that you can do with yourself or with your staff. And it's just looking at what are our core values. So first, you're going to identify your top 10 values. And we're not going to do it all now because I don't want to take up too much of your time. I think we had until 10:30 and we still have quite a bit of presenters. And then from there, you would narrow those down to 5. And from there, you would narrow those down to 3. So depending on how you want to move forward, you can do this with your school, you can do this with teams, you can do this with families. Ideally, you would want to have a school culture that would align on all 3 of those. So identifying those core values, ultimately, we're all talking about the same thing when we're talking about families. We want safety, we want belonging, we want our kids to learn and to be safe. Those are core values that regardless of whatever side of an argument we're on, we want the same things. We want our kids to be healthy, safe, and really to feel loved by their schools. A side note is a student who is more likely to know or to be able to identify an adult that will know that they're gone is less likely to be absent. So chronic absenteeism is a huge issue in our state. But students who know that, let's say I don't come to school for a week, and Max is my science teacher. Max, on Monday, the first thing he says to me is, "Hey, I know that you weren't here last week. We missed you." I'm going to remember that as a student. I'm going to come back because I know that Max is going to notice. I know that I matter. Our families are very similar in that sense that they want to know that they matter. And if they know that their absence is felt, then they're more likely to show up and to communicate with you. Think about how you define family engagement. Again, are you going deep? Are you thinking about things at a superficial level, or are you thinking about how are we really getting to know our families? I didn't include it here, but the Flamboyant Foundation has a spectrum on high quality family engagement, and on the lower end, it's potlucks and celebrations. Those are great. But again, they're superficial. You might interact with people for, maybe 5 minutes even, but you're not really getting to know them. What you want are things like home visits, collaborative projects, and things like that. How do you know if you're effective with family engagement? The indicator 8, and we do say parent involvement only because that's the federal language that's still used for the survey. But that's one thing, that's one survey that you have access to that can inform your family engagement practices. It is specific to special education, but if it's happening in special education, looking at, is that a special education or is this a symptom of a broader school culture trend that we need to address? And then really thinking about, why are we invested in family and community engagement? Until you have a strong why, it's really difficult to have a team that buys into the practices that you're promoting. And again, it's going to take time, because all things take time, especially when they have a huge value and huge impact. Ensuring that parents play an active role in developing their child's learning, that parents are actively involved in their child's education at school, and that parents are full partners in their child's education and included in decision-making. That is our job. We're setting the stage. We're making sure that families are supported. We're making sure that they're able to participate. And then when they aren't, we're looking to understand why and then shifting our strategies. That's all that we're doing. We're just supports. We're just the guardrails. And we're really just seeking to empower our families. So that way, when they transition into post-secondary or secondary, depending on what type of setting we're at, that our families and our students are able to be successful in that next step. These are some different things that we have coming up. You can email me if you would like some more information, things that are currently available. So we have our Back to Basics introductory training. It used to be offered in person, but I know that is difficult with travel, but it is available online now. We just did our first one. You get 4 relicensure hours if you participate. It is a lot of information. It's superficial. This is for your folks that want just a quick overview. I know nothing about family engagement. Can you just, what does this even mean? That this is for those folks. Jody, I'll put my email here and at the end. And then April 11th, if you can just put a hold on your calendar. We're working on getting approval, and we won't know until probably the end of October, maybe November, about our Family and Community Engagement Summit. So we have a hold on April 11th. If you could place a hold on your calendar, it'll be our second one if we get approval. There's also the Family and Community Engagement newsletter. You can find an archive of these on the USBE webpage, which is also linked on the PowerPoint. I update the webpage as much as possible with vetted resources and different websites that you can use. Yes, 2025, sorry. 2024, that's not accurate. 2025 for next year is when this will happen. And then there's also the Utah State Board of Education's parent portal. So we do have a parent liaison named Cassie Hayes, who works more directly with parents or support schools as they work with parents. Recently, she has defined their role as more of a conflict resolution with parents, but that's another resource that's available to you all as well. Some current projects that I wanted to make sure you all know about. So we have the Science of Reading. It's a community engagement project. So we have different cohorts. This is the Science of Reading, but it's looking at how to host in-person events and community events. It could be regional events around Science of Reading, but to train families so that they can support at-home literacy activities. There's also the Parent Power Communication Pilot. This is also available for 2 years. free to schools. And what families do here, it's going to build a few things. It's going to build math literacy, English language literacy, or English literacy. I know it's redundant, Christelle, to say both. And it's also going to build on family protective factors. And so families here get 3 text messages a week. They can opt out if they would like to. The same way, if you're like me, you subscribe for the 10% off coupon for the first purchase, and then you have to hit stop so that they stop sending you text messages. Families do the same thing, but it's a fact, an activity, and then a reflection text every week. That's going to help support those 3 things. Research has shown that those 3 areas do improve when families participate. And then we are looking at seeing, will the research translate to the Utah context, but then also in our parent survey with special education, we found that a lot of parents wanted more frequent and ongoing communication beyond academics. We're looking to see if this is going to help meet that need. I'm sure you've all got that parent that wants communication every single day about what their child did. That's not always feasible. Very rarely is it ever doable. Hopefully this can meet some of that for families, while also helping you all with just doing your job. And then my final request before sharing my email is in regard to the Indicator 8 parent involvement survey. So we have been able to increase our response rate here with families because we have promoted awareness and we've been working more closely with LEAs. However, we are looking at a different strategy to see if that's going to help, not just with this survey, but then with future practice. So the goal here is, can we start to text families links to surveys instead of doing paper and email only? Before we can go down that path, we need to ask our families what their response would be to getting a text message from the state, from USBE specifically. If families say, I don't like that, that would scare me or it would make me angry, then we won't even pursue it. If they have a positive response, then we will. But I'm asking for your support. If you could please share the link or the QR code with your families so that they can answer this question. It will help me know, how do we go forward? Do we even pursue this? And then this is my email, and I'll put it in the chat as well. Once I find how to stop sharing, I will stop sharing. And then are there any questions that you all have that I maybe didn't cover or that you would want me to clarify?
Susie, there was just a year with a question mark. It says 2025 with a question mark. Not
Yeah.
exactly sure what that was in reference to, but I think it was probably.
It was about the summit.
Okay.
Yeah, the summit had the right date, but the wrong year. So hold April 11th, 2025 for the Family Engagement Summit. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. What questions, comments, or anything do you have for Susie while we have her? Susie, thank you very much. She has been a valuable resource. If you had the opportunity to attend the Parent Summit last year, it was fantastic. Parents come and provide insight, and you get to be front row to hear what they're saying with regards to their engagement. One of the things that we know, and you're familiar with, is when we implement strategies in schools, specifically for Title I, there's a requirement that they are evidence-based, meaning they have shown to have functioned to improve the growth and academic achievement of students in schools. Parent engagement has always been at the forefront. It's one of the only ones that's universally approved by the Department of Education as evidence-based. We know that if parents are partners in their students' learning with the school, that the education doesn't end when students walk out the doors of those schools. It continues when they get home. There's a relationship there that's meaningful, and it has shown to make impact on that student's learning experience. Thank you, Susie. Appreciate it. I'm going to share my screen here and call to the stage Dr. Christelle Estrada, there is a pretty exciting opportunity. Is that showing your
Yes.
slide there? Okay.
Yes.
Dr. Christelle Estrada, please let us know about this new opportunity.
Yeah, so thank you, Max. The important thing is that all the information you ever would want to know about students learning English is on the updated Title III website. The monitoring schedule is there, the funding, the MOUs for those LEAs whose allocation is below 10,000. Fabulous examples of programs for newcomers. Actually, districts have summarized them and put them on our website. Also examples of competency-based ESL endorsements and the impact that's actually having on student learning in relationship to the capacity of teachers to adjust their instruction based on the needs of learners, setting their goals and helping students set goals for themselves in a personalized competency-based approach. So if you go to the Title III webpage, there's professional learning. It's a catalog, and it's always 3 credits, new courses. So the one that I just started that we have people enrolled in through Midas is teaching writing to students learning English, and also the newcomer toolkit and English learner ebook studies. These are all self-paced. They're Midas credit, but it's not for grading. It's personalized mastery in relationship to applying what you're learning to your actual classroom. Again, the competency-based ESL endorsement really focuses on embedding professional learning in the actual context of a teacher's classroom with doing case studies as well as support from every district. So we have Box Elder, we have Jordan, we have Canyons, we have Granite, we have amazing charter schools, Monticello Academy that actually started this 7 years ago when I worked with the director then and their team. The newcomer program designs by districts. The one I want to highlight is Granite's. So Granite initially had the Tumaini program that ended up being, you know, a certain way to provide the kind of support. But now they've transitioned it to what Dave Gomez calls the Tumaini process that's actually embedded in every single school in Granite. The other thing is the interpreter certification course. You realize that HB 302, which was legislation that passed in 2022 unanimously by the state legislature and with the support of Dan Johnson, an amazing human being, about the state obligation, as well as federal, obviously, to provide interpretation so that parents, families are actually, as Susie says, engaged in the educational process of their students and are informed in a way that they can make knowledgeable decisions in a context that often they're unfamiliar with. The interpreter certification course is sponsored by USBE. It's a 10-week course focusing on the legislation as well as the way in which interpretation should be done based on the national standards. If you go to the Title III website, you'll actually see the application. In the 2023 or 24 cohort, we had 117 applicants from all over the state. Community members, literacy centers, registrars, counselors, ALS directors. And so one of the really amazing initiatives, I give a shout out to Michelle Eldridge in Provo School District. The whole idea is to disseminate the capacity. So when the level 1 certification, which September 30th, all those who have completed the 10-week course will be certified by USBE. Those who are certified are then the ones who will have complete access as teachers to the USBE Canvas course on the district system and begin to recruit, and Provo's already done this. They've adapted our application to their application, and they now are in the process of having one of their people who went through the level 1 certification as the teacher, and there's also a level 2 certification that will be opening up in October. The next cohort will start in February of 2025, and the application is on the website. So the consequence of this is that every district who has interpreters, and every LEA, every charter that has an interpreter that goes through the 10-week course with me, then will be certified by USBE and can take the advanced course, and then can also offer an LEA interpreter certification that will be sustained by the districts. And remember, all this is at no cost to the interpreters. Through the work that our team did with Leah Voorhees, we ended up contracting with an outside national group who can certify at the highest level of interpretation services in a 40-hour online self-paced course. So these are all the really amazing things that people are doing. The other thing is, remember, on the Title III webpage, everything you'd ever want to know and all the questions you're asking are there. The biggest thing for me is to make sure that counselors are using the placement guide for international transcripts. To think that international coursework doesn't meet the expectations of Utah courses is a mistake. And even when there's an issue, and I'll just give you one simple example that I heard from Robin Williams at Murray and also Salt Lake. When there was a student, and some of the students come, if you're escaping the Taliban, you're not taking your transcripts. I mean, come on, let's be clear about that. Same thing with when you're escaping the Russians from the Ukraine and the children are coming, sometimes with their mother, sometimes not, in a sponsor family from Utah with an open heart. And the question ends up being, how do you verify their learning? Well, that's the whole point of a personalized competency-based legislation, which is you meet with the family, you meet with the student, and you ask them. So the two examples that I have, the only thing that was keeping a student from graduating was PE credit. Even though in Afghanistan, then this is also in the Ukraine, they have like military training, which is, 3 years of huge exercise and physical abilities. And so, this is a competency way to show that that PE credit was already earned in the context of the student's school. And so, hats off to Provo, who's kind of on the forefront. Other districts are joining for the interpreter's certificate and certification program. Hats off to Murray and Salt Lake that has actually used an individual learning plan to really use the placement guide for international transcripts on the USBE Title III website to really have a conversation about competency related to the students' actual experiences, their lived experiences in their own country. If you have any questions, or if you want to go to the website and see the monitoring schedule, and you want to come with me on a visit to any of the schools, please do that. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Okay, so no questions. Thank you so much. One of the best things in my life has been working with teachers and students and educators in Utah. So I just, from the bottom of my heart, I just want to thank you for that opportunity.
Dr. Estrada, thank you very much. I've seen firsthand how much effort she has put into these things and how much involvement she's had in working through these to make these resources and make these opportunities available. Really appreciate it, Christelle. Christelle is a really valuable resource. So if you have questions about any of these things, or Christelle also administers Title III, you have questions regarding that, first go to that website, the USBE website. There's a ton of information there, and then Christelle can be available for follow-up questions or things that may not be clear. I'm not sure if Ryan's here, but I wanted to just again put my 2 cents in for the ESEAnow.com website. We're in the process of renewing our contract with LRP Publications to make this resource available for all LEAs. So I know in the past you've received some communications from LRP, and I've gotten emails that said, "What is this?" Ryan's going to explain again what this is and any updates that are available. Many times questions come in where, can we use money for this, or what does this mean? One of the things that I do when I receive those questions is I'll first go to the ESEA Now website, because on that website you can put in particular things specifically that you're looking for. LRP in the ESEA Now website has an entire team that's dedicated to going out and finding answers for particular questions. We have the opportunity with them, if we have questions that are unique to Utah, to reach out to them and have them research answers or research evidence or anything that we're looking for specific to Utah that we may need. So Ryan, are you here with us?
Yes, hello, Max. Good morning, everyone. Thank you
I
for
will
joining and
stop
thank you for
sharing.
having me. Yes.
And Ryan, if I can, I'll just get Becky to stop recording. As I said, we will have this resource available for the foreseeable future. If you currently don't have access, please reach out to Ryan. We've made this so that all of our schools can participate in having access to this. And again, I'll just put my pitch in. This resource has been very beneficial. There's a lot of moving parts with our federal programs, and a lot of times when you're looking for answers for things, you have to go to 50 different places. And even though the Department of Education just updated their website, it's way easier to come here, or even a lot of times to come here first before you even go to the USBE website, just because you can search specifically for things that have been researched and built upon that research. So it's updated and it's accurate. Thank you, Ryan. Any last comments?
Yeah, exactly. I want to thank you everyone for your time. I appreciate it. And don't feel like you are, if you feel like you're getting stuck, give us a call. Even after 5 minutes, give us a call. That's what we're here for. It doesn't cost extra. You're not bugging us or anything like that. That's what we're here to help you really kind of ease the research or look something up. So feel free to call. Feel free to schedule webinars or attend the webinar that we're going to have in a few weeks coming up here. And we're always here to be assistance for you.
Thank you, Ryan. Really
Yes.
appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And thank you for having me today.
Okay. I'll take over from here. I'm going to share my screen. And we have some updates that I want to share with you. I know how popular, and I know how transparent and user-friendly the Utah Grants Management System is. So I don't want anybody to be upset to let you know that there are some updates to the system. We've been meeting as a team internally with the developer of Utah Grants, REI, for a little more than a year, weekly, many times twice a week, regarding these updates. Here are some of those that are specific to Title I. So here's the big news. The application for FY25 Title I is available. It's in the system. If you are not the person that is the contact, whoever that person is in your LEA should have received a communication from Utah Grants that the application is open. The application deadline is November 1st at 5 o'clock. That's a pretty short turnaround. This is earlier than the application has been available for a number of years. So that deadline is coming up pretty quick. We do encourage you to try to meet that deadline. Once we pass that deadline, it becomes a little bit cumbersome to go back and extend the deadline for particular LEAs. So as we're moving forward, as you're looking at and putting together your application to submit, if you have questions, please reach out. I did include a link here at the bottom of the page to the Utah Grants Title I application instructions. It'll take you to Utah Grants website at USBE, where those instructions are listed and other instructions should you need them. Okay, in the past, one of the updates is you'd always have to complete these attachments, the plan, the GEPA statement, and then upload them into the system. That has changed. This year, all of those are internal forms. So this is what the website, unfortunately, they still left the tab as attachments, even though none of those are attachments. You just click on that I and it allows you to go in and complete the form for each of those particular things, some of which used to be attachments. Here's just an example. One of the biggest ones that you used to have to complete and then attach was the LEA plan. Now, it's lacking the colors as a form in the system, but it still has all the same parts. There are narrative sections and then assurance sections. And this is kind of what it looks like. It goes on for a few pages, but it's, I think, a much easier process going through than completing that attachment and then uploading it. Here's something to be aware of as you are completing your application and getting ready to submit it. Here's something that we get questions on quite a bit. On the building eligibility form, we'll get panic questions. We've completed the building eligibility form, but nothing is showing up in the school allocation form. And this is generally why, and I put a square around it with an arrow there in red. There is a services tab with a drop-down box. If you select none, no services, that particular school that is listed there will not show up on the school allocation form. You have to select one of those items and the services that are being provided. Targeted assistance, school-wide. I think there are various other school-wide in existence, school-wide new. It has a whole bunch of those things that's relative. But just keep in mind, if you don't select one of those and you select none, no services, which I believe is the default, it won't show up on that school allocation form. So for example, here's one where a none, no services was demonstrated, and in the school allocation form, nothing showed up there. So just be sure of that. Here is another big update. Be aware of this. There used to be only 2 set-asides in the launch set-asides form. There was required set-asides and optional set-asides. Now there are 3 pieces that are in there. There are still the required set-asides. If you have nonprofit private schools, you receive over $500,000 for family engagement, then there is a required set-aside. But there is this new category and potentially required set-asides. And this is actually in Utah Grants. It may be required based on results of the LEA Comprehensive Needs Assessment. Homeless and neglected and delinquent. In the past, it was required for you to put a number in there. The problem with that is, then when we get to the end of the year and you haven't spent any of those funds, or you didn't have any of those students that you would have spent those funds on, we can't shift those out of there. They're in there and they have to be spent on those particular things. So what has changed is the opportunity to, if you don't have, through your comprehensive needs assessment, identified homeless students or students who are categorized here as neglected and delinquent, you don't have to put a number in there. It should be based on what you've identified in your comprehensive needs assessment. Some of the submitted applications that Val and I have sent back have been specifically for this. We've looked at the LEA plan, and the plan says we don't have any homeless students, but then in this potentially required set aside, they've put in a dollar amount. Well, if you don't have any homeless students, you don't necessarily need to put that in there. If you don't have homeless students and you put a set aside for homeless students, that's all that fund can be used for, is services and assistance to support students experiencing homelessness. Questions about this particular piece? Okay. Just a last notification. During the monitoring visits, and Val has furiously been working to get those schedules and send out, arrange those dates and schedule with you. As you know, there are two components to a monitoring visit. The first is the programmatic, where we talk about what the requirements are for Title I programmatically, but then Marilee and Clint participate as well for specific fiscal issues. One of those that comes up often is the maintenance of effort. One of the requirements when we monitor is that there is a policy for maintenance and effort for the LEA, and then a copy of the previous year's calculations. So keep that in mind if you are going to be monitored this year, that if you do not have these things, they will be asked for. And we can't close out the monitoring visit as being in compliance with no findings if we don't have those things. Marilee, Clint, is there anything additionally you'd like to say about that?
Sorry, trying to find my audio. No, I think you're great. We just want to make sure there are some good resources out there on calculating them in the DMI and in the Title I handbook. So if you need help in calculating them or see how we're calculating it when we calculate also as a state, let us know.
Thank you, Marilee. Last notification I wanted to share here was the deadline to request reimbursements on last year's funding, FY24, is December 10th. So as we get closer to that, keep in mind that is the last date to request reimbursement on those funds. Well, we are working with REI, our contractor who develops Utah grants. There are some upcoming things that we are assuming will happen this spring, this summer, and will be available next year for the applications. One is that we are going to be able, through Utah grants, to consolidate applications. This will be forthcoming. What this will do, and which benefits us, is you won't have to complete 10, 20 different risk assessments for each program and then have them included in that particular grants application. The other is the GEPA form. You will only have to fill that out once and it will be submitted. Again, there's more information forthcoming. We're still working with the contractor to get these technicalities figured out and try to foresee what problems we may have as we move forward through this. We know that there are LEAs that consolidate their funds in certain ways, but this will be an opportunity for the LEA to consolidate funds through Utah grants to eliminate some of the burdens of repetition in that system. What questions do you have regarding Utah grants, any of the updates, or any of the forthcoming updates? So I'm looking at the chat here. Okay, and as you're completing these applications, please reach out. Val is the pre-approver. She looks at them first, and then I look at them second. If you have questions as you're doing that, please reach out. We can help. There is, and Ryan touched on this, for the first time in about 10 years, the Office of Management and Budget has updated the uniform grant guidance. In suit, the Department of Education has provided some, not as many, but they've provided some nuanced updates to the Education Department General Administrative Regulations. And from here on out today, I'm going to refer to these as the UGG and EDGAR. In the first time in 10 years, just for context, the Office of Management and Budget, they provide this guidance. The UGG are guidance for the award and administration of any federal fund. So it is anything that comes out of Congress, anything that comes out of the federal government as a grant, the OGG is that guidance. So when you call and you ask, is it okay if we spend funds on certain things? One of the places, the first places that Marilee and Clint, Val and I will go to is to the UGG to make sure that there's nothing in there that conflicts, or if there is guidance that that explains it more clearly on the use of funds. I put a whole bunch of links in here if you really want to go down the rabbit hole like I did with the UGG revisions, the Federal Register. When these materials are made available to you, all those links will take you to the most updated versions of those things. In turn, EDGAR is the same kind of guidance, but it's specific to the U.S. Department of Education, and it's only federal education grants. So a lot of times we'll start there and then take a look at the UGG to see what is appropriate use of those federal funds. I will note here that I won't talk a lot about updates to EDGAR. 2 weeks ago, we had the opportunity to meet with Julia Martin from the Bruman Group, who is the legal representative or the representation for the Council of Chief State School Officers. The purpose of that meeting was to talk about updates to EDGAR. Her response was, in careful review, there aren't a lot. There's clarification in language. They've tried to align the language more clearly with the statute of ESSA, but there aren't a whole lot of differences that would stray or that would be in conflict with what's in the UGG or the statute. However, the UGG, the new updates are available. They became available April 4th, and they focused on 6 areas, which I'll kind of explain a little bit more in detail. Burden reduction, from the federal government, evaluation, data, community engagement, and then notices of funding opportunities, which is really only applicable in the UGG for the state, labor and administration. The burden reduction, what OMB tried to do through UGG is just clarify certain language, eliminate redundancies, try to eliminate specific language that only people who work in the federal government would know what they were talking about. So they just tried to clean up the language. Something new in the UGGs is for evaluation. You can use federal funds for evaluation activities to talk about how your programming is making progress towards your goals. That's new. The other one that is new is you can use your federal funds to help data gathering and analysis. So if you do that and you're saying, well, we want to be able to, really dig deep into some of these types of things and really reflect on our data, systems of data, you can use federal funding for that. And again, community engagement and public participation. The language in the UGG has gotten much stronger and clearer to encourage the use of funds for community and public participation and engagement. EDGAR also reflects that. It again strengthens language to talk about using your funds, using your resources to make sure that your communities, your families are engaged in the learning of their students. And as I said, the notices of funding opportunity, they're trying to clear it up and expedite it so that when that notification comes to the states, that it's earlier, it's clearer, and there aren't so many things we have to wait upon to be able to then in turn process that and get those available to you. There are some nuances in the language for labor and administration. And again, I put links down there. If you want to really go down the rabbit hole, like I did, you can look into those. Some specific changes that I want you to be aware of, as far as equipment, it increases the total from $5,000 to $10,000 for equipment that at the end of a grant period may be retained, sold, or disposed of. You don't have to then, again, we don't have to report that up to the federal government. It just doubles that amount at the end of the grant period. Unused supplies similarly. It extends that or expands it from 5,000 to 10,000. The value of those supplies that you have that are unused, that doesn't need to be reported again. Single audit has changed. It increases for any particular grant, including Title I, a single audit requirement from $750,000 to $1 million, that requirement to conduct a single audit for Title I or any specific program funding. And again, the links are at the bottom. I put a whole bunch of resources here if you want to delve into that and become more clear. And if you have questions, please let me know and we can together look at those. What questions do you have about the UGG updates or the EDGAR updates, or Federal Register can be lumped into that as well?
Max, there's a question about the difference between the December 10th deadline to request reimbursement requests from school year FY24 or 24 Title I-A granted funds.
Both. So it would be FY24, so your 23-24 school year funds. Those funds must be encumbered in that grant cycle September 30th, Monday, but you can continue to request reimbursements through Utah grants until December 10th. Does that answer that question? If it doesn't, please reach out and we can clarify that too specifically. And as I said, afterwards we'll hang out afterwards. Thanks, Sandra. Appreciate it. Okay, if there are no questions about uniform grant guidance or EDGAR, I want to move into something else that has we've been receiving a lot of questions about, and that's the community eligibility provision. We've been getting a lot of questions about this because the Department of Agriculture made some changes to that particular opportunity, that particular provision. It used to be that you had to be, well, let me clarify here, that you had to have at least 40% of your total school population be eligible for direct certification, meaning they get free meals based on a different set of eligibility for that. It's direct certification. So if a student participates in SNAP or TANF, in some regards pieces of Medicaid, they automatically qualify for free meals. So what the CEP does under the Department of Agriculture is it says if at least 25% of your students are directly certified under one of these other programs, SNAP, TANF, then you can apply to receive meal waivers for 100% of your students. You apply to become a school that operates under the community eligibility provision, and then you no longer, or you have this status for 4 years, you're no longer required to collect free and reduced lunch surveys for those students. You qualify for CEP, automatically 100% of your students receive free meals. Here's the catch, and here's where the questions have been coming in. These are two different departments at the federal government. CEP is a program that is operated out of the Department of Agriculture. Those meals are reimbursed from the Department of Agriculture. The Department of Education does not operate the CEP provision. We use data from the Department of Agriculture where we lack Census Bureau data for allocations. This is where it gets tricky for Title I. If you qualify and are awarded this provision, the CEP provision, you no longer have to collect surveys, free and reduced surveys, or home income surveys. The catch is Title I doesn't have a mechanism. It doesn't have its own mechanism to collect student data for allocation purposes. The Department of Education uses Census Bureau data for school districts, and for our charter LEAs, we use free and reduced lunch counts. And if you are a CEP school that is not required to collect those, you wouldn't have that data to submit in your October 1 count in UTREX, which we have to use to allocate funds to those schools. Here is what the Department of Education has reminded us. If you are a CEP school or you're planning to become a CEP school, statutorily, you may not default to 100% economically disadvantaged count for Title I allocation purposes. We need to know specifically for Title I allocation purposes, how many of your students are in that economically disadvantaged category. So, for district and multi-site charter LEAs, the Department of Education has provided some guidance. Essentially, what they say is you have to use a common poverty metric, and then they give you some examples of this 1.6 multiplier that you can use in your rank and serve for those schools where you have CEP schools and non-CEP schools. And then I've put a link down there to the guidance that walks you through how that's done. And it also puts in a whole bunch of examples. That's works, and that's good for district and multi-site charter schools. The problem is with single-site charter schools who are operating a CEP, where you're in that category, you can provide free meals to 100% of your students. And this is supposed to relieve the burden of collecting free and reduced lunch surveys. What we didn't have was a mechanism to account for that. So what we're going to do, and we've been working with the Department of Education on this to get approved, what we will do next year for funding is we're going to take a look at both things. We're going to see what your direct certification numbers are. We will use the 1.6 multiplier on that percentage and see what that total is. Then we'll compare it to what's been submitted in your October 1 UTREX report, and we will take the higher of the two percentages for the Title I allocation purposes. Again, I put the link down there at the bottom. Again, this has been quite a process to get through. We have a very, it's a complicated formula process when we're allocating Title I funds, and we knew that this had been an issue, and we knew that it wasn't accurately demonstrating, especially where we had single-site charter schools that were operating a CEP under that provision, accurately report or accurately allocate Title I funds. So we contacted the Department of Ed and went through a process with them to be able to do this next year. We were approved for that. Marilee or Clint, is there anything additional about this for our single site charter CEP schools that I missed?
Not that I can think of.
Okay, this gets pretty complicated. What questions do you have about CEP in general, or about how we're going to or planning to allocate funds moving forward? Listen, I didn't know a whole lot about the CEP provision. but I know a little bit now, and I've made really good friends with Kimberly Loveland, who's the director of the child nutrition programs. So should you find yourself in this situation, please reach out to us and we can work through this together. Okay, this is just a pitch for participation. One of the requirements under Title I is that a state has a committee of practitioners to provide advice that is specific to Title I. Anytime that we are proposing rules or changes, or there's something that's new or happening with Title I in the state of Utah, we defer or we refer to our committee of practitioners to provide input, take review of those things, and make comments on those. For the past couple of years, I've really abused a couple of folks out there with you. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Janie, for participating in our committee of practitioners. There is a requirement. The requirement for membership in the committee of practitioners is that you know about Title I and you know about programs. They have a may include all of these things. Here is my plea. If you are interested in participating in the committee of practitioners for the 24-25 school year, please reach out to me. We have 3. The meetings are fairly brief. I'll tell you a couple of things that we've been able to do in the last couple of years because of the committee of practitioners. A couple of years back, we had a drastic drop in Title I funds. With the committee of practitioners' approval, we were able to move through board committee process, full board, and have approval from the Department of Education to waive that 15% waiver, or that 15% limitation on carrying forward funds. And we did that because we had a couple of LEAs who really took a hit in that funding. So because of the committee of practitioners, we were able to do that. Similarly, the committee of practitioners approved us providing some supplemental funds where we had some clerical errors in funding some smaller LEAs, and we were able to support them to implement critical programs that they were implementing for their students. Also, the committee of practitioners provides input and makes the final decision on which schools will be sent to the ESEA National Conference as a distinguished Title I school. Here are the dates. And again, contact me if you are interested. We would love to have you. The more, the merrier. We would probably limit our capacity if everyone's excited, which I hope you are, to participate. You are the inside track. What questions do you have about the Title I Committee of Practitioners? Okay, thank you. Reach out to me. I will be reaching out to you if you don't reach out to me to hopefully get some new folks in and take some of the weight off of Steve, Michelle, and Janie. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing, Val, and we are at the point in the agenda where I'm going to turn the time over to you.
Thanks, Max. Hello, everyone. Thank you for staying around. You know, I actually asked for this coveted spot of being last on the agenda after 2.5 hours of heavy-duty content. I asked for the last spot because what I'm going to present does not apply to single-site charters. So you may choose to leave for the rest of the day, or you may choose to leave for the next probably 40 to 45 minutes, and then come back for the Q&A with Max, or come back for office hours with me. If you're going to come back for office hours with me, let me get this link to my Zoom room. And you can just pop into the Zoom room probably around 11:30. And then before I get started on comparability, just a reminder that The DMI this year, think of it as due not December 1st as it usually is, but November 26th, due to the Thanksgiving holiday. December 1st falls on the Sunday of that Thanksgiving holiday. So I really don't want anybody working on that weekend. So keep that in mind, put it on your calendar. The first link is the new URL to access the DMI. I sent it out a month ago with the link to the video, but some people didn't either get that email or didn't see the link. Our IT department made an update to a new server, and so that changed the URL to the DMI. The second link there is just that step-by-step video for completing the DMI. Okay, with that said, let's go on to comparability. I have only been reviewing.
Val, just a quick question. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
There's a question in the chat. If your LEA has all Title I schools, do you have to complete a comparability report?
Yes, you do. In fact, Arlene, thanks for asking the question. These are the two groups of LEAs that don't need to hang around unless, put me on mute for whatever amount of time if you're going to hang around. If you're a single site charter, or if you're an LEA that has only one school per grade span. For instance, North Summit, Grand County, they have one elementary, one middle, and one high school. And for a minute, I was thinking Tintic, because I saw you on here, Karen, but Tintic has 2 elementaries and 2 high schools, essentially. So even if you have all Title I schools, you do need to compare them.
Hey Val, another quick question. You said single site charter. We have a K-8 and in high school. Does that count as a single site charter?
Who's
It's
asking that
Venture
question?
Academy.
Oh, Venture. Are you counted at just one campus though in the Utah?
I believe they are counted as K-12, yes.
Same with Mana Academy and same with, I think, American ALA down in Spanish Fork. I think they're all considered one, even though they have separate grade spans.
And
even-
separate buildings.
Yeah, it's separate buildings, separate grade spans. So yes, Jody, you would be exempted from that
Okay,
requirement.
thank you, Val.
And
Sure.
Beehive is same to K-12, but kind of, yeah, I'm assuming it's the similar.
Exactly, Hanifi, yes. All right, moving on. I love these questions, so keep them coming. Because you have your phone right there, I know, will you point your camera at the QR code? And we're going to do just a little pre-assessment about what you know, what you don't know about comparability. So when you point it at that QR code, you should have a little forms.office.com pop up. If you would click on that, and it takes you to the quick knowledge check. I want a lot of participation. This is totally anonymous. There are 5 questions. I'm going to give you a minute and a half to go through those questions. You're going to click start now to start the pre-assessment. And when you finish, click submit. Okay, 30 more seconds. And just a reminder, scroll to the very bottom and click submit. Okay. And looking at, whoa, so far so good. All multi-site charters and all districts must complete the comparability report. We have, oh, darn it. We have, the majority of you said true. and 11% of you said it depends. You're both right. So in those instances where there are districts with one grade span per grade level, or charters with one grade span per, or one school per grade span, you don't need to complete the comparability report, but everyone else needs to complete that report. Okay, and the second question, LEAs can exclude schools with fewer than 100 students. I don't think our older form did a very good job of this. So over the last couple of years, I've been taking notes of things that could help us actually make your job easier. So yes, you can exclude schools with fewer than 100 students, and I'll show you how to fill that out on the form. LEAs must count any skipped schools. This one, we have a bigger variety of answers. It is true. You must count them as Title I schools. And this is another thing that our old form really did not facilitate at all, and something that I think we've been out of compliance with. So going on to the supplement, not supplant. Is supplement, not supplant, and comparability essentially the same fiscal requirement? False. So the majority of you got that right. However, when we do our monitoring visits, the majority of LEAs talk about the two as if they're the same thing. So we're going to distinguish those two fiscal rules in just a second. And lastly, when it comes to Title I comparability, I have complete understanding of the requirements. Okay, more than any the other two questions disagree or strongly disagree. So I'm glad that we are going over this today. And I'm glad some of you do agree with that you do feel more comfortable with about the having an understanding. You feel confident that your LEA completes the annual report accurately. I might have you thinking otherwise in just a little bit. And then our LEA has policy and procedures, which are easy to understand and follow. To tell you the truth, in our monitoring visits of the past couple of years, I have seen 0 policy and procedures, which are easy to understand and follow. So again, we'll talk about all of that. Oops, skip over that. So just going back to that supplement, not supplant versus comparability. They both examine how LEAs distribute state and local funds or resources to schools. That's the thing they have in common, trying to make sure that LEAs are using Title I funds supplementally. Comparability's focus, though, is on the services that the schools are receiving. Okay, and the services in the form of student to staff ratio, so in FTEs, as well as in the educational materials and resources they're allocated. Supplement, not supplant, is the methodology that your LEA has in the way that they allocate the funds without regard to the school's Title I status. So in a graphic format, before I go into the graphic format, 2 examples of how you could meet one of those fiscal rules and violate the other. So in the first example, the LEA complies with supplement, not supplant, because it allocated all its Title I funds in a Title I neutral way. No, you do not need to fill out the comparability form as a single site charter. And however, in the same example, the LEA does not meet the comparability requirements because the Title I schools, they have a higher student to teacher ratio than the non-Title I schools. And that ratio is more than 10%. So there is some leeway when you're demonstrating comparability. In the second example, we have the district or the charter meeting comparability because they have a similar student teacher ratio in Title I or non-Title I schools, or in North Sanpete, if we're talking, or South Sanpete, sorry, Arlene, where there are all elementary schools that are Title I in the same grade span. They have similar teachers to student ratio. But in this example, the LEA doesn't satisfy supplement, not supplant, because when they were allocating their state and local funds, they gave more funding to the non-Title I schools for technology because they were like, well, that's an allowable expense under Title I. So here, you guys use your Title I funds for this, and the non-Title I funds will give a little bit more technology funding too. So that's a violation of supplement, not supplant. And it would also show up in the comparability as well. Here's the graphic, a little blurry, but this is in your guide that I sent out maybe 2 weeks ago. This guide is also under the DMI Annual Core Item 45 in the Resources tab. So we're looking at Title I, non-Title I schools, or in this case that you have all Title I schools, what are they getting with your Title I funds? Not your Title I funds, sorry, with your state and local funds, to ensure that this extra layer of Title I funds is just there to supplement what all the other schools are getting. So let's have a working definition. See how many blanks you could guess or fill in. What is the intent of comparability? LEAs must use which funds to provide what to whom, that taken as a whole are at least comparable to the what provided to whom. A lot of blanks there. LEAs must use state and local funds. So all 3 fiscal rules look at state and local funds: comparability, supplement, not supplant, and maintenance of effort. And by the way, I created a new resource for maintenance of effort. So if you're a little worried about what Max just said about you having to have that for your monitoring visit, the DMI item 43 has a new resource in it. So LEAs must use state and local funds to provide services to Title I schools that taken as a whole are at least comparable to the services provided in non-Title I schools. And then the federal government goes further in its statute and says, if all schools in a grade span within the LEA are Title I schools, all schools must be substantially comparable. And that comes from 1118 of the ESEA. These are the exemptions. 2 of them I've mentioned so far. LEAs with only 1 school or 1 school per grade span, and then schools with fewer than 100 students. So let's just take, because I can see Karen, let's take Tintic. Tintic has 1 school, essentially 2 schools that have less than 100 students. So those schools are not counted in the comparability. Well, that leaves Tintic with 1 elementary and 1 kind of middle high school combo, and they don't have to be compared to each other. So once Karen fills out the first page of the form, Tintic is taken care of. No extra forms are needed. And we'll go over how to determine that in detail. And then since preschool is not a required grade level in Utah, you do not include preschool staff or student enrollment. This is another table graphic that appears in the comparability guide, so that it just summarizes which LEAs need to complete it, which schools, which students to include, and which staff to include. And I'll go into more detail at the end about which staff. There are some state and local funds that can be excluded when you're calculating comparability. Those are any state and local funds that you might be providing to, say, non-Title I schools to support their language learners. If you have students with disabilities that have excess costs, say you have medically fragile students or deaf or hard of hearing students that require an ASL interpreter, those extra costs do not need to be included in the comparability. And if you happen to have some state and local funds that are used in a similar way that meet the purpose of Title I, say for Tier 2 support or for MTSS, then, well, that's the same thing. You do not need to include those supplemental programs. Very quickly, policies, procedure, and report. These assurances used to appear on the spreadsheet. And every year, everybody filled in yes. And then when we went to the monitoring visit, they were like, well, what policy, what procedures? So I took this off. These no longer appear on the new form because they really weren't doing much good anyway. But just as a reminder, it's still an assurance on the LEA plan. It's the very last assurance, letter Q. So every LEA that is required to demonstrate comparability must have a salary-wide schedule and a policy to ensure equivalence among the staff, the instructional staff, as well as the funding that goes towards the curriculum materials, supplies, and technology. The written procedures are those step-by-steps, the steps that guide you in fulfilling the policies, ensuring that schools are comparable. And again, refer to the resource tab under item 25 in the DMI for that guide if you can't find it in your email. The report, most people think of the report as the comparability. Look, we're comparable. We did it. We did our report. When in fact, it's the policy and you following the procedures that is the most important thing. The monitor or the report is just, see, we are in compliance because our policy is working, our procedures are working. And there's just another link to the DMI, a correct link to the DMI embedded in these slides that you'll get. Becky will post them online when the recording is ready to post. Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty of the new comparability report. First, the timeline. I think most of you are aware comparability is not retrospective, it's current year. And there's only a month of days that you can choose from to select your data to compare. So between September 30th and October 31st, you choose one day. Let's say you choose October 1st, because that's a very common day to look at data. You use that one date to compare your schools with the data. And then if there are any discrepancies, any Title I school that is not comparable, you need to make sure that they are comparable by November 30th. So that gives you 1 to 2 months, depending on when you collect your data. And then your LEA submits that comparability report by December 1st. Again, remember this year, it's November 26th. In your mind, it's November 26th, so you're not working over that holiday weekend. Here's that skip schools thing, coming back to our pre-assessment where it was almost 50-50 of those that thought it was true, you need to count skip schools as Title I, and those that thought it was a false statement. So a skip school, such as a necessarily existent small school, because nest schools, they receive that extra state funding that allows them to be skipped. And then many of our districts, especially our district LEAs, focus on the elementary schools with their Title I funds. So they may have to skip a middle school or a high school in order to allocate Title I funds to an elementary with a lower poverty rate. They must be considered Title I just for comparability purposes. So when you're calculating comparability, you don't include those supplemental funds like the NEST funds. Keep those out of the comparability. And now just a note, most of your NEST schools are also going to be excluded from comparability. The federal government allows some flexibility in how you compare. You can compare all your schools together. You can list all your elementary, middle, and high schools and just compare them. But I would not recommend that. The flexibility comes in breaking them down into grade spans. We know that it costs more typically to have a high school, to fund a high school, than it does an elementary school. And in order to determine your grade spans, it should basically match the organization of your LEA. Now, there are a few LEAs out there that are constructed, your organization is a little wonky, goofy. So you're going to have to figure that out, what works best for your LEA. So most of you are organized as an elementary, middle, and high school. So you would have 3 grade spans. Some of you have a junior high in there, so you might have 4 grade spans. And some of you might just have 2 because your high school, middle school are together. So here's a graphic representation of those that have maybe a little wonky, goofy organization. If you have like a K3 school and a 4-6, the K3 and 4-6 don't have any crossover, but they do have crossover if you have some schools with K6. The K3 school has 4 grades in common with K6, and the school with 4-6 has 3 grades in common. So altogether, you can count them as the K6 grade span. So include a school in the grade span where it has the most grades in common. Now, you cannot separate a school in order to avoid comparing it with at least with a grades with another school that has at least one overlapping grade. Here's another flexibility to group your schools even further, and that's by size. And this was on our former report as well. You could say these schools are larger and these schools are smaller. If one or more of your schools have half the enrollment of the next larger school, you could consider them smaller and then the other ones larger. And I'll show you what that looks like. You could leave all your elementaries together. You don't have to separate them out if you don't want to, or all your middle schools or all your high schools, depending on what your configuration is. So Form A is the form that all of you need to fill out unless you only have one campus, one school, or if you have one school per grade span. Like I gave you the example in North Summit, they only have one elementary, one middle, and one high school. So Gary, you don't have to worry about the comparability form anymore. This is what the new Form A looks like. This looks a little busier maybe than our last one, but I hope it's going to help simplify things in the long run. This top part is where your information goes if you're preparing this and filling it out. If your business administrator fills this out, make sure they have their email address, especially this first year of the new report, so that I can contact them to ask questions if needed. Here's a section now where you can put the schools that have fewer than 100 students. So once you put them in that B section, you don't have to count them down here in the C section. C section. Okay. In the C section now, this is where you're going to put any school that has more than 100 students. So the first one is your grade span. So right here, you're going to delete what I have here. And the gold fields are the fillable fields, by the way. You're going to delete that and put your first grade span. Then you're going to delete the next one and put your second grade span, etc. And then you see the size groupings, the smaller or larger. You can opt to do that if one school is half the size of the next larger school, or you can keep your school, all your schools together to compare them to. Then we're going to list just the number of Title I schools versus our non-Title I schools, and a reminder to include any skip schools. Again, this has not been something that our LEAs have been doing in the past, but this is something that hopefully we'll start doing now. If not, you'll need to revise your spreadsheet. So listing those schools, this last column, for every yes, you're going to complete an additional form. If it remains no, you do not need an additional form. And this just automatically calculates that for you. So let's do a couple of examples. And I'm going to call it a game, so it sounds like fun. So at 11:07 in the almost afternoon, you have more energy to get through these last few slides. So this game we're going to play is determining how many additional forms the LEA needs to complete. Our first LEA example is going to be Murray School District. Now please do not get your data from the Utah grants, because you know that's old data and we want current data. But because I don't have access to your current data, I went into Utah grants to get the data. So I have some color coding here for you. The silver or gray rectangle means it identifies a skipped school. And under the services category, remember Max mentioned you need to make sure that you identify your Title I schools under services or you won't be able to find them on another form. So we have in Murray School District 1, 2, 3 schools that are Title I. And they had to skip over Hillcrest Junior in order to fund Liberty and Horizon. The next color code is this green oval, which is identifying a school that is half the size of the next largest school. So you notice that Liberty Elementary is half the size of Parkside and almost a third of the size of Horizon. So if Becky wants, and it's still true with the current data, Becky can skip or not include Liberty, can count Liberty as a smaller campus and count Parkside and Horizon as larger campuses. So in red, we have our Title I schools. And Hillcrest, we're considering Title I because we skipped it. Then in our blue, we have our non-Title I schools. Notice Murray only has one high school. If you only have one non-Title I grade span, there's nothing to compare it to. So we're still going to put it on our form, but I didn't come up with a color code for it. So let's see what it looks like on our report. The grade spans are now listed. This one under smaller is Liberty, and then we have Parkside and Horizon listed under larger. We're comparing those two to our 4 elementaries that are not Title I. So yes, we do need to fill out an additional form for that grade span. Then we have our 7, 9. I didn't list them under smaller. I chose to list them under larger. It doesn't really matter if you don't have a distinction where you list them. So we have Hillcrest compared to Riverview. And yes, we do need a form. So see, this is where you may have been thinking you were doing it correctly in years past, but due to this update, you're going to need to fill out an additional form. And this was not included in the DMI video. I neglected to include the skipped schools in that. And then remember, Murray High is by itself. Since there are no Title I schools, it stays no. The last thing to do before you move on to completing the forms is to make sure that you've captured all your campuses. So I have 10 campuses accounted for here. Murray had no tiny schools, no schools with fewer than 100. So if I were to go back and count how many schools they have, it should be 10, which it is. Okay, let's try it again with Sevier School District. How many additional forms do you think Sevier is going to need? Well, we have our same color coding with skip schools, with Title I schools, and with non-Title I schools. The red rectangle is identifying the tiny schools with less than 100 students. So already we know that these two are exempted. So we have Ashman, Salina, Monroe, and Pavant elementaries all receive Title I funding, as you can see over here on the right-hand side. It would say targeted assistance if you only have targeted assistance schools in your LEA. Okay. Notice the groupings, the grade spans they have. K2, K5, K5, 3, 5. So all of them have at least one grade span in common. The K2 and the 3, 5 do not, but they do have in common with Salina and Monroe as K5 schools. And then we're going to compare North Sevier, which we had to skip in order to fund our other 2 elementaries. We're going to compare it with the 2 other middle schools. So on our report, notice up here at the top, we got to exclude Coucherum and Cedar Ridge High. And by the way, Coucherum Cafe, chef's kiss. Okay, K5, notice this is different from Murray, K5, 6, 8, 9, 12. And under Title I, only Title I schools. So back to Arlene's question, does Sevier have to complete a form for them, an extra form? Yes, they do. And then the skipped middle school, we have 1 Title I and 2 non-Title I. So Sevier now needs to complete 2 forms. Their 3 high schools have nothing to compare to. If we add up 10 plus 2 and going back to the list of schools, they have 12 schools in severe. Okay, this is where you're going to figure out how many extra forms Summit Academy will need to do. So Summit Academy, I outlined this far right-hand side because they used adjusted enrollment numbers, just like the other LEAs that we've looked at so far. I'm going to give you my color coding. Notice that they have targeted assistance. That doesn't change anything, but we've been looking at school-wide schools prior. So now we're looking at targeted assistance. So how many forms do you think Summit Academy is going to need to fill out in addition to Form A? Looking at the grade spans. If you said 1 form, you are right. So they had 3 1 K6, 2 K8. So our grade span is going to be K8. 3 compared to themselves. We need to compare. But if you only have 1 Title I school in a grade span and there's no non-Title I schools to compare it to, you do not need to complete another form. So we add that up. They have 4 schools total. Kane County, we only have 2 more. We're going to go through these quickly. This Kane County might be a trick question. So Jim, I hope you're still on here. Although your data might have changed, and so when your data changes, then so will your comparability report. Okay, using the color coding, can you determine how many extra forms Jim's going to need to complete? So in Kane County, there are 4 tiny schools. So those 4 are going to be excluded. We have a really huge elementary school compared to a tiny elementary school. And then the schools that we skipped are the ones that are excluded. And so we only have non-Title I schools left. And when we only have non-Title I schools in a grade span, we won't need to complete another form for them. So if you guessed 0, you are correct. Okay, so we have the 4 tiny schools listed up here. We broke up our elementary schools because one was way bigger than the other one. And then our 3 secondary schools listed as 712 are non-Title I. So Jim lucks out, at least this year. Well, at least in this example, I shouldn't say this year. Okay, this is our last one. Lots more schools. So we have our 5 tiny schools that Box Elder can exclude. It did skip over a high school in order to provide services to North Park. Notice that that high school is much smaller than the 2 other high schools. So because it's so much smaller, it won't need to be compared to them because we can distinguish smaller and larger campuses. So in essence, all we need to do is compare our 3 Title I elementaries with our many non-Title I elementaries. Willard we could pull out just because it is much smaller than the rest of the non-Title I schools. It's much smaller than the Title I schools too. So When we put all those numbers in our form, it comes out to yes for just the elementary larger campuses. When we add them up, we have 17 plus the 5 that we got to exclude, and that's 22 schools that are in Box Elder School District. Whew. Any questions before I go on to the other forms? One for every yes, what do those additional forms look like? And is anybody still here? That's the question. Okay. Something that hasn't changed is you still have 2 ways to demonstrate comparability: the student to staff ratio and the per pupil expenditures. So here's where I want to go into, thank you, Ashley. Here's where I want to go into which staff do you include? Obviously, they're funded by state and local funds, right? So we're not including anybody that's funded by federal funds. So teachers and other personnel assigned to schools who provide direct instruction, such as classroom, music, art, physical education, gifted and talented teachers, and long-term substitutes. You can include counselors, speech therapists, librarians, as well as other personnel who provide those direct services, such as social workers, psychologists. Here's the caution that I've continued to make year after year. If you have paraeducators, paraprofessionals, or instructional aides paid from state and local funds, please don't count them as a full FTE compared to teachers and all the rest of the instructional staff listed above. Count a full-time para as a 0.5 FTE if you're going to include them. The other way to demonstrate comparability, and actually to tell you, this is the preferred method, just because it's a lot cleaner, the data are so much easier. This is preferred. However, you still have the choice of per pupil expenditures. And this is where you would total the amount of state and local funds allocated to each school for curriculum materials, instructional supplies, including technology. In the guide, there is this decision tree because it can get pretty confusing. Which form do I use? I filled out Form A and it tells me I need to fill out 2 more forms. Which forms do I need to fill out? Well, if you notice the color coding from those 2 previous slides, we have the student to staff ratio in blue, per pupil expenditures in a reddish maroon. So on Form B, we can see we're comparing student to staff ratio, Form D, per pupil expenditures, Form C, student to staff, and per pupil expenditures on Form E. So starting over on the left-hand side, are there only Title I schools within a grade span? Let's say we're thinking back on Sevier. Remember, they had four elementaries that were Title I schools and no non-Title I schools. So yes, we're for that one. And then we can opt for Form B or Form D. Okay. Now let's go on to, remember, Sevier skipped a middle school, and so they had to fill out an additional form, but they also had non-Title I middle schools. That one Title I was just because it was skipped, right? So now for the middle schools, our choices are Form C or Form E. It will just help, it'll just expedite things like the previous form could not, if you choose the right form. Okay, so again, this decision tree is in the comparability guide. So let's go back to Murray School District, and then we'll also do Sevier School District, what their forms would look like if they filled it out with the data that I invented kind of from 2 years ago. And then just before I switch over to the spreadsheet, if you want support, if you want a one-on-one to complete your comparability report or to double check it with me before you submit it, I am happy to do that. October is the best time because that's before we get inundated with the Title I applications, the DMI, and monitoring visits start. Okay, let me switch to.
Hey, Val, Christine has one quick question in the chat.
Great. Do you want to read it while I'm?
Sure.
spreadsheets.
Can we count a teacher opening that we are seeking candidates for, but have not been hired yet? And I think that's in your, the red grouping in the form.
Right. That's a great question. Yeah, as far as long as you ensure that you fill that would definitely be a thing that you would count. Good question. Wendy, that's a really good question about, oh, sorry, it's a direct message. Sorry, Wendy, I will calculate yours. What I said about the smaller and larger campuses, and actually I'll demonstrate it when I get to on Murray's right now, right here. So here's that Form A that we've been going over. And just to answer the private message to me, is in Murray School District, they have Tiny Liberty, which only had 220 something students. And their next larger school was Parkside, I believe, that had 480. So it had over twice the enrollment in its school. So if Liberty is half the size of the next larger school, then you can separate out by size. And that way we can see we're not having to compare Liberty to the big schools, because we know it costs more to operate those tiny elementaries than it does to operate a larger elementary. So I'm hoping that you can see, oh, have I shared yet? No, I haven't shared. There I go, talking. Am I sharing my screen?
You're sharing, but it still says support to complete the comparability.
No, I'm not sure why it's not sharing. Let's see. How about now, Max? Oops.
Still that same slide. There you go.
Whoa.
Now it changed.
Woof. Okay. All right, so this is Form A. We've already seen this from Murray. And sorry, let me go back since I was talking about my screen and you couldn't see it. Right here, that Liberty Elementary is listed as the tiny, smaller school. And then the Parkside and Horizon are listed as the larger schools. Those larger schools are going to be compared to the larger non-Title I schools to make it fair. And then our skip school, Hillcrest Middle or Hillcrest Junior compared to Riverview. Those are the two forms we need to fill out. So since we have both Title I and non-Title I, if you can see my tabs at the bottom, they kind of try to fill you in. Form B is Title I only, FTE. Form C is Title I and non-Title I, FTE. That's the one Becky's going to choose if Murray is going to compare on the report student to staff ratio. So in here, I filled in, remember gold is all the fillable fields. I filled in K6 and I filled in larger because I crossed out Liberty, but I just wanted to show you, you do have the option to include Liberty if you want to, but you don't have to. So we compare Parkside and Horizon Elementary and just make sure that you know you are listing Title I schools at the top this time. It might be a little confusing because in the past you've always listed non-Title I schools at the top. So Title I schools first, and you put in the actual grade span, followed by the total enrollment, and here you can see how tiny Liberty is, followed by the number of instructional staff, and there's an asterisk, and on the same form, I gave you the same definition of instructional staff, so you can see. And that will automatically calculate the staff ratio, the student to staff ratio, and it will automatically tell you if it's comparable to the non-Title I schools that you fill in the bottom section. If you get a no, then it's your responsibility to, and it actually has instructions up here. If you get a no in column 6, you could choose a different date because maybe a teacher started after the date that you selected. And so that one teacher brought up or brought down the student staff ratio to a comparable amount. And then at the bottom, you can see that you just have to be within 110% of that for your Title I schools to be comparable. If you have to use another Form C, you need to create an additional, you need to copy that form. I gave you step-by-step instructions in the guide, but it's pretty easy. You right-click on the tab, and then you're going to click on Move or Copy, and then you're going to click on the one you want to copy and click Create a Copy, and it will just add it right in there. Let's go to the additional form. Let's see. There we are. Here's where I have Hillcrest Junior High. It's not getting Title I funding, but because Murray skipped it in order to fund Horizon Elementary, we need to include it. So again, the grade span listed up here, you don't need to click smaller or larger because we don't have that distinction in the junior highs. They're fairly similar. And then the number of instructional staff, it will calculate that ratio. Uh-oh, it's not comparable. So what do you do in that situation? Well, you could choose a different date to compare them to. But remember, you have that 1 month between September 30th and October 31st to choose one date to compare. If you can't, by choosing another date, demonstrate that Hillcrest is comparable to Riverview, then you need to make a staffing change, add a teacher. You probably don't want to make students, you don't want to change the enrollment of Hillcrest in order to make that. That's a lot more impactful. So what I could do here is we need to get Hillcrest an additional instructional staff member, and then that will make that comparable. Okay, you don't just change the number, you actually have to hire an additional staff person. Okay, let's go on to Sevier. And just a reminder that Sevier had 2 campuses that had less than 100 students, so they excluded them by listing them up here. We have 4 Title I schools, no non-Title I schools, but we still need to make sure these 4 are substantially comparable to each other. And it gives us a yes over here. And Sevier also had to skip a middle school in order to fund 1 additional elementary. So we have to compare that skipped campus to the other 2 middle schools. And our 3 high schools don't have any comparison. So
Hey, Val, you're still showing the Murray example.
oh my goodness. Thank you, Max. Did that switch it?
Still that same slide.
It doesn't say Sevier on it?
No, it says Murray.
How about now?
Not yet.
How about now? No?
There you go.
Oh, my goodness. All right. Hopefully sharing slides is more confusing than this actual new comparability report. Okay, Sevier, we have our 2 small, tiny campuses with fewer than 100 students listed up here. 4 Title I schools, no non-Title I schools, but we still have to make sure they're substantially comparable, so that's why we have a yes. We skip that 1 middle school. We have to compare the skipped middle school to the 2 unskipped middle schools. So we have another 2 forms for Sevier. Now, Sevier usually chooses to demonstrate comparability with per pupil expenditures. We're going to have to use 2 different forms because 1 form we have only Title I schools, and 1 form we have technically a Title I school for comparability purposes and 2 non-Title I schools. So down at the bottom, we're going to use Form D, which is Title I only for elementaries, and Form E, which is both Title I and non-Title I. So you can see this one has no place for non-Title I schools to go. And it's going to compare any school listed here with all the other schools listed. So we have our grade span K6, but remember, Severe has a little different organization. So we list their actual grade span in the second column, the student enrollment, and then the state and local funds allocated. And again, if you are not sure what funds we're talking about, it's listed down at the bottom, the asterisk. This column 5 will automatically calculate the per pupil amount and determine if they are substantially comparable. Notice I didn't choose a smaller or larger on this one because they're all fairly the same size. And then going to our middle school that we skipped, comparing it to the 2 non-Title I schools. We have, it's a lot smaller than Red Hills. So you could actually leave Red Hills off if you wanted to, and compare just North Severe with South Severe, since they're have more in common as far as enrollment size. And then comparing the amount of state and local funds allocated, again, it will calculate the per pupil amount and determine if the skipped school is comparable with the non-skipped schools. Whew, we made it. 4 minutes over. I can answer all your comparability questions in the DMI office hours, since it's something that goes in the DMI, or you could ask questions now if you're not going to hang out around for the DMI. So that is all I have. I'm going to put in the link to my Zoom room. So if you need assistance with your DMI, you can go into that room. Let me get it in the chat. Okay, thank you. Max, over to you.
Val, thank you very much. Well, folks, we've reached the end of the Fall Title I Directors Meeting. It was a lot of information, so I thank you for bearing with us. These materials, as well as the meeting recording, will be sent out to you. The materials will have the active links in them to all of the things that we referred to today. So at the end of this meeting, I hope that everybody gets out this weekend and is able to enjoy Utah's second summer for the weekend. It is Utah. It might snow next week. So those of us at USBE who are able will hang out here if you have additional questions or questions that are specific to your LEA. If you don't, we're done. Reach out to us if you need some time, something comes up, additional questions arrive. We're available. Email us, call us. If you call, please leave a message. Oftentimes, we get a lot of vendors that call, so sometimes we have to screen those phone calls. So please leave a message. We will get back to you. So thank you very much for being here. We really enjoy working with you. We look forward to seeing some of you, and we will end this meeting. We'll hang out if you have specific questions, and thank you. See you.